Welcome again. My name is Ben Olson. I'm one of the co-founders here at LSAT Demon. Thanks for filling out this poll. Looks like some of you are brand new, but a lot of you have been here for a while, maybe over 4 months even. Wow, okay, great. Most of you here, it looks like, are free. The vast majority of you, although the rest of you fall into live, premium, or basic. That's awesome. I hope this is a good class experience for you. It's going to be a little bit different than the norm just because we have so many people. I'll try to keep it moving quickly. A couple things to keep in mind. We are going to be going over reading comp, and if we have time, we're going to be doing logical reasoning as well. But if you have a question that's on topic to whatever we're talking about at the time, you can send a message in the chat at any time. Eric, Abigail, I think Chris, are you here? I can't even see you, but okay, there you are, Chris. I see you. Yes, great. Thanks for coming. They can answer any LSAT related question. Jen is here as well. Jen is on our help team. So if you have any questions about plans or your account or whatever, feel free to shoot them to her. In any case, you can always use the chat, but if you have a question that's on topic and you want to ask it verbally, then go ahead and raise your hand, use your raise hand feature in Zoom, right? And I might not be able to call on all of you, but I'll try to call on as many of you as I can. If your question is off topic, definitely do that in the chat so we don't get derailed, right, in terms of where we're going as a group. Cool. I guess this wasn't part of the poll, but I'm also curious how people found out about this class. I think we talk about it on the podcast. We probably mentioned it on social, but today's class is unusually large. So if you maybe want to tell us in the chat where you heard about this, we'd be very curious. Oh, email, of course, too. Okay, great. TikTok. Wow. I'm not even on TikTok. Maybe I should go on there one day, just see what that Wild West is like. All right, cool. Well, let's see here. I'm going to start. By the way, Eric, do we need to pin my screen? Has that already happened?
Can do. Oh, there you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to start and I'm going to talk about reading comp a little bit. There's a lot to say about reading comp, but I want to focus on what I think is the most important skill. I'm sure you all have heard of the 80-20 rule. Have you guys heard of that? Right? Like 80% of your results maybe come from 20% of the things that you do. Of course, those numbers don't have to be perfect. They can vary from different domains as you go from one domain to the next. But in reading comp, I do think that 80% of your success is going to come down to these small things that I'm going to talk about today. There are other things, of course, that you can do and that can help you, but I think the bulk of your success is going to come down to understanding the passage, right? So a lot of people, when they first start doing reading comp, they read through the passage fairly quickly. They just read it. And then when they're done reading it, they then go into the questions and they end up spending the vast majority of their time answering the questions or spending their time, in the questions trying to answer them. What actually happens is that as they're answering a question, they don't fully remember the answer or understand the answer. So then they go back to the passage. I don't know, has anyone ever done that? Gone back and reread a paragraph and then been like, oops, maybe not that paragraph, maybe the next one. Then they read the next paragraph again, right? And then you're going back to that one question or maybe that one answer choice and continuing on. And sometimes that helps you find the answer. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it actually throws you off because you read the wrong part of the passage or you overemphasize some part of it. My point is that when it comes to reading comp, you want to shift your focus to the passage and really understanding that. And what that may mean for a lot of you is that you end up spending half your time in the passage just reading and understanding it, and then the other half of your time in the questions and answers. Because what happens when you really understand the passage is when you go into the questions, they become a lot easier and faster, right? You're like, oh, well, they're asking me X, and I know the answer probably should look something like Y. And so then you go and you look for the answer and you find it. That doesn't mean you can't go back to the passage, but it just becomes much less common. And when you go back, it's very specific. You're looking for very specific information, and you almost always know where to look for it. Okay, so how do you get better at reading and comprehending the passage? First, make that your goal, right? Like, make it a priority to become the expert in the room when it comes to this passage. These passages may feel long because they're longer than logical reasoning, they're longer than games, but in reality, does anyone know how many sentences these passages tend to be? Got a lot of votes here. I see 15, 30, 25, 150. No, not 150 sentences, but they tend to be about 15 sentences. That's it. There's 15 sentences. Now, the LSAT sentences tend to be kind of long and annoying, but there's not that many sentences that you have to get your mind wrapped around to understand this passage fully, right? So how does this look? What ends up happening is I will start reading the first sentence of the passage. And if I don't understand any part of it, I will stop and I will reread that part so that I can get my mind wrapped around what the author is trying to convey in that sentence, right? A lot of times when people don't understand something in reading comp, they charge ahead. They go to the next sentence. They hope that, oh, if I keep reading, it's going to click. It's going to make sense. That might be helpful in some cases, but in the vast majority of cases, if you're not understanding what that sentence is saying, you need to go back to that sentence and possibly even break it down. It's very common for me to read a good portion of a sentence, hit a comma, or especially a semicolon or something like that, and stop and just take a moment to digest what I just read. Because if I can understand what the author is trying to say in their sometimes abstract, academic language, then I'm set for whatever sentences come next, and I'm going to be preparing myself for the questions and the answers. Mateus, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So my question, I was watching a podcast a bit ago, in connection to that you should read the passage maybe at least 2 times as opposed to 1 time. So how do you reconcile that with the advice you just gave now? Because there's times where I'll read slowly, pause, and retain that information. And I feel like I could go through read it again, but then again, I already spent so much time with the passage, right? Because I read slowly, took pauses, right? Should I still maybe try to read it a second time, or what's your take on that?
No, I don't think that's necessary. In fact, if you ever read, like, let's say you even read just half the passage and you feel like, oh, I don't get what's going on, that probably means that you zoned out or something, right? And we want to catch that right away. We want to understand the sentence that we're on, not realize that we didn't understand it 5 sentences later. And if you really do understand the sentences as you're reading them, then the need to reread becomes usually unnecessary. So I would just, that's never my plan. My plan is really just to understand what the author is saying as I go. So sometimes that has meant that I've reread the first sentence 4 times. That's not the plan. That's not normal, but it's my commitment to getting what the author is saying. And part of the reason I did that actually that one time is because I wasn't engaging with the content. I was still thinking about the previous passage or whatever the hell I was thinking about. And I realized that whatever the author had just said didn't click, right? So I read it again. Okay, once you read and understand what the sentence is saying and what the author is trying to say to you, then you're in a much better position to react to that content, right? It shocks me how many times we read sentences in logical reasoning or in reading comp together as a class, and then I say, hey, what do y'all think of that? And people are like, huh? I don't know. No reaction, right? Like the LSAT could literally say, the world has been getting colder for the last 10 years. And it's like, hey, what do you guys think about that? And everybody's like, I don't know. What? Yeah, I guess it's getting colder. It's getting colder. No one thinks that, right? Like at the very least say, hey, last I heard, I thought the world was getting warmer. So this sentence is claiming that the world is getting colder. What am I missing? Did I misunderstand the sentence? Like, you need to have some level of engagement with this content, and you can't engage until you understand it. So read one sentence, try to understand it. If you don't, break it down, read it again, then react to that sentence on some level, right? Like, okay, it makes sense to me, or that's weird, or surprising, I never thought about that. Then go to the next sentence. After you read 3 or 4 sentences, sometimes 2, sometimes 6, you might need to stop for a half second and recap what the author has been saying in your own words. This is not a process where you look at the page and restate or just say back exactly what the author is saying. It's more like you're looking into your own head and trying to figure out what you understand the author to have been saying so far. Okay? If you have to look back at the passage, then you probably haven't been engaged enough, right? But you might, that's okay. You might need to remind yourself, you're like, wait a sec, I'm not clear on what the author seems to be saying so far, and then look back. But ideally, you can summarize this in your own words, and then you continue reading. And the reason I say 3 or 4 sentences is that some people talk about pausing after every paragraph or something like that. But ideas and the idea that 2 or 3 or 4 sentences is trying to convey is not necessarily neatly conveyed in paragraphs, especially on the LSAT. They can have long ass paragraphs that have 3 core ideas, right? Or they can have, so I'm not going to rely on the author's determination to put in a paragraph break. I'm just going to read sentences and then at some point stop and think, okay, I get what you're saying, and this is where I think you're going. This is where I think you're likely to go with this information, even though I don't know for sure. And then I continue reading, right? Now, by the time I'm done with the passage, I'm going to stop and do the same thing again and just say, okay, bottom line, this person basically made 2, 3, maybe 4 points, right? It might be something like, hey, the critics of some proposal have pointed out these flaws. These other people have pointed out why those flaws are stupid. And here is what I think. Sometimes the authors don't tell you what they think. They just tell you what the critics think and then what some other people think, and then they just stop talking. But whatever the passage ends up doing, what you need to be able to do at the end of the passage is summarize it in plain English in a way that makes sense to you. If you're the expert on what this person was trying to say to you, then you should be able to do that in plain English, right? Once you can do that, then you're ready to answer the questions. So there's really like 3 things where I want you to make sure you're understanding. 1, you're understanding sentences one at a time. 2, you're understanding groups of sentences, right? You're reading a sentence, understanding it, then you're reading it with some other sentences, and then you're taking the idea that the author is trying to convey with those sentences, combining them together and saying, okay, the bottom line of these sentences is X, right? And then finally, you need to be able to do that for the entire passage. Okay. Once you do that, the questions should be fairly downhill from there because you understand the passage. And really, that's what this section is testing, reading comprehension. The title is not silly, it's quite literal. Okay. Questions on that process? Objections?
So I have a question on exactly because I used to this is my first class with the team. Excuse me, my name is Parker Leventhal, and I used to be with Kaplan, and they used to tell me to try to skip through and find sentences that was ultimately give you the point of the passage. But the only problem is I would have trouble finding those sentences. What are your thoughts on that exactly?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here, Parker, because I don't know how you could do that. I don't even know how that's possible without it's like determine that sentence is somehow more important than this other one without having even read it, right? Kaplan, unfortunately, is one of those, I guess, prep companies that's giving out information that's actually more harmful than no information, right? It would be better for you just to give it a go, learn from your mistakes, and then see what happens than to even like try to grapple with this because this information becomes distracting.
Right.
In any case, glad you're here. Just focus on 100% on understanding. Now, what this will mean for a lot of people, and I don't know if this will happen for you, Parker, but a lot of times this means that we're going to take a lot more time in the passage than we're comfortable with, right? So maybe before you were completing 3 passages in the 35 minutes, or maybe you were getting to all 4. And unless you're getting a high percentage of those questions correct, like very high, 95% correct or something like that, it probably means you're going too fast. And so for some of you, you may say, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to try to understand the passage. And then you find yourself only able to do 1 or 2 passages in 35 minutes. And you're like, well, that was a shit show. That was horrible advice. Thank you. Goodbye. But actually, if you can only do 2 passages in 35 minutes, but you get the vast, vast majority of those questions that you attempt correct,
right,
you're in a much better position to eventually get to 3, 4 passages high accuracy than you are if you practice low accuracy, but doing a lot of them, right? We want to actually practice what it's like to be good. It's like slowing down your golf swing, right? Like get the golf, I don't golf, but slow down your golf swing, get the swing right, and then worry about playing games or doing, a faster swing or whatever, a more powerful swing. Get your form correct, then slowly do more and more questions. Okay.
Right.
Cool. Good
Thank
question. Yeah. Any other questions? Kahil.
Hey, it's Khalil.
Khalil, sorry.
You're chilling. It messes up my family too. So I missed the first part. My audio wasn't connected. So at the beginning of the passage, I heard you mention something about looking at questions. Are we not looking at questions until we have a full synthesis of what we're understanding? We've gone through the passage. We've gone through the steps of understanding in our own words, what the author is saying, like you said, be able to picture that, and then we're going to the questions, or are we looking at the questions and then looking at this? Keep it on.
No, it's a good question. So we definitely want to understand the passage first and then worry about the questions. Really, what we're trying to do here is become the expert of the passage, and that means clearing out any sort of distractions, right? We're not reading for structure. Oh, I got to find the conclusion. Oh, I got to find we're just, what is this guy trying to say to us, right? What are you trying to say? And what do you think of that? And then if you can clear everything out of your mind and just focus on that, then you're ready for whatever people throw at you, right? I like to think of this as like a conversation. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and for whatever reason, I don't know, your phone vibrates, or you get distracted by some fast moving car, and then you miss what someone said, right? And you have a choice. You can say, oh, I'm sorry, what did you just say? And you can have them go back and say that information again. And as soon as they say that, you understand what they're saying and you continue on fully engaged with the conversation. Or you can do that thing where you're just like, yeah, okay. And you don't know what they said. And it's this awkwardness where you're trying to like put together the pieces and you're like, did they say they're breaking up? Because like, it almost sounds like that, but I didn't hear that key part, right? And it's this fake conversation. That's what people do in reading comp all the time. They miss key parts and they keep going, hoping that it will come together. And they start to fill in gaps and assumptions that just mess everything up. And it's almost like, I don't know how the test writers do it, but they write wrong answers that play into those gaps. So anyways, hopefully that makes sense. I've talked a lot. I hope that some of that was helpful. Let's go ahead and do this practice problem. It's on the syllabus. I don't even know, what is it called? Let's see here. Oh, Irish landscape. Okay, it's from test J, passage 4 apparently. I'm going to give you maybe 12 minutes or so. I don't know how long it will take you all to finish this passage. You don't need to finish. What's more important is that you do well on the questions that you eventually get to. So go ahead and do this passage. When you're done, fill out the poll so I know that you're done. And then I'll also know which questions to go over as a group. Okay. So good luck and thank you. Okay, that was about 14 minutes. It looks like most of us are done with the passage, so thanks for filling out the poll. And most of you enjoyed it, even though a lot of you were bored and some of you hated it. Okay. Well, yeah, I even if you hated it, actually, I wonder if hating it could be better than being bored. Because if you hate it, you might be inclined to engage with it, right? On some level, you're like, no, please. And that might help you understand it. As long as you get the questions right, that's what really matters in the end. One thing about these passages, by the way, they're pretty short, and law school is pretty long, and the stuff you have to read for law school is pretty long. So hopefully you can find the will to get through even boring stuff here, or at least some reason to get through them. In any case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to read this passage as I would read it on the test. But I am going to stop and tell you what I'm thinking. So that's not going to be the same by any means. And I'm going to focus on the things that we just talked about. So one, reading and understanding individual sentences, reading and understanding groups of sentences, right? And then reading and understanding the passage as a whole. Okay. Let's jump in. In tracing the changing face of the Irish landscape. Okay. Not sure what exactly is changing, but I guess the landscape could be changing. I don't know if that's culturally or actually physically, but in tracing those changes, scholars have traditionally relied primarily on evidence from historical documents. Okay, so to try to figure out how the Irish landscape has changed, they've looked at historical documents. I guess that makes sense. People probably wrote about the landscape or society. If I'm assuming this is more physical than social, but however, such documentary sources provide a fragmentary record at best. Okay, so they look at historical documents, but it's really hard to get a good picture. That makes sense to me. I don't know how far back in history these scholars are going, but the further back you go, the less helpful I imagine the documents are. There's probably not that many of them, and they don't really say what you want them to say. Reliable accounts are very scarce for many parts of Ireland prior to the 17th century. Okay, notice that's not exactly what I just said, but it's really damn close, right? When you're engaging with these passages, you read, you understand what the author is saying, and you have thoughts or comments on what the author is saying. Those thoughts and comments could be inconsistent with what the author goes on to say, but they could also be consistent with what the author is about to say. So you really start to, understand what the author is trying to convey when you're saying things that end up being said again, right? Okay, anyways, the docs were scarce before the 17th century. Makes sense to me. And many of the relevant documents from the 16th and 17th centuries focus selectively on matters relating to military or commercial interests. That's weird. I thought they would focus on like religion. Seems like most documents in the past were religious. I guess this person says many of the relevant documents. So maybe the religious ones aren't relevant. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Point is they were focusing on other things. Studies of fossilized pollen grains preserved in peats and lake muds provide an additional means of investigating vegetative landscape change. Okay. I'm going to stop here because I think I understand where this author is going, right? The author said, hey, scholars have looked to historical documents to figure out what's going on the Irish landscape. They're so-so. They're okay, but they're not great. And now the author is telling me about fossilized pollen grains. I didn't know that pollen grains could even be fossilized, but I suspect the author is going to tell us how this is another way of understanding the landscape, or maybe a better way, something like that, right? When you got here, did you feel like you understood that, or where the author was probably going with this? If you did, you're engaged. And I mean, we'll see if that's actually what happens, but you really want to be that in tune with the person you're reading, right? Or whoever wrote this, you're in tune with them. Details of changes in vegetation resulting from both human activities and natural events are reflected in the kinds and quantities of minute pollen grains that become trapped in sediments. Okay, wow. So we can learn a lot from these fossilized pollen grains. Analysis of samples can identify which kinds of plants produced the preserved pollen grains and when they were deposited. In many cases, the findings can serve to supplement or correct the documentary record. Okay. Wow. So we can learn what plants there were. We can learn when they were, and then we can say, hey, that's inconsistent with what people wrote down. Yeah. Science. It probably works better than like humans writing things down who are just random people. For example, okay. So I'm pretty confident about where this passage is going. And now we're going to see an example of how these pollen grains work, probably. So I think, and examples, by the way, are always evidence. It's supporting a claim that came earlier. The claim that came earlier had to do with the fossilized pollen grains being this tool that we can use. So now I'm going to see an example of how that tool can be used. Analyses of samples from Longlock in County Down have revealed significant patterns of cereal grain pollen beginning by about 400 AD. That's a really long time ago. I think we had just talked about the 16th and 17th centuries so far. So this goes way back. The substantial clay content of the soil in this part of Down makes cultivation by primitive tools difficult. Okay, so wait. Significant patterns of cereal grain pollen. Okay, anyways. Cultivation was difficult. So it was hard to cultivate this stuff. Maybe it grew naturally. Historians thought that such soils were not tilled to any significant extent until the introduction of the mold-bored plow. I don't know what that is. Mold-bore plow to Ireland in the 7th century AD. Okay, so if historians thought this, then I'm expecting the author to say that they're wrong. But we're talking about 400 AD, and then we have the 7th century. Wow, so a long time later. Boy, okay, so 1,000 years or so later, they didn't think that this thing was tilled until then, or such soils were tilled until then. Okay, because cereal cultivation would have required tilling of the soil, the pollen evidence indicates that these soils must indeed have been successfully tilled before the introduction of the new plow. Oh, okay, so I thought maybe they grew naturally, but this person is saying, no, they must have been tilled somehow, even though they didn't have this plow. And we know that because of the pollen grains that we discovered. Wow. Okay. So that is correcting. I don't know if it's correcting, but it's definitely helping historians in a way that the documentary record did not. Sound good? So that's an example of how this new method is helpful. Another example concerns flax cultivation in County Down, one of the great linen producing areas of Ireland during the 18th century. Okay, now we're moving way into the future. Some aspects of linen production in Down are well documented, but the documentary record tells little about the cultivation of flax, the plant from which linen is made in that area. Okay, so we had a lot of people producing linens in the 18th century in County Down. And apparently to make linens, you need to cultivate flax. I did not know that. I had no clue that flax is used to make linens, but whatever. The record of 18th century linen production in Down together with the knowledge that flax cultivation had been established in Ireland centuries before that time, led some historians to surmise that this plant was being cultivated in Down before the 18th century. Okay, so they made linens in the 18th century. They could cultivate flax well before that. So they probably did cultivate flax before that. Some historians thought that. So what is the author going to say? But pollen analyses indicated that this is not the case. Flax pollen was found only in deposits laid down since the 18th century. Okay, so again, the historians are corrected by this new methodology. And specifically, we learned that flax cultivation did not happen in Down until they started producing linens, which also kind of makes sense, right? You start making linens and then you're like, hey, we need flax apparently to produce these linens. So let's go ahead and cultivate it. Apparently they didn't cultivate it before that. Unless of course this methodology has flaws, but as far as we know, okay, 2 corrections to the record. It must be stressed though, that there are limits to the ability of the pollen record to reflect the vegetative history of the landscape. Sure, it probably can't tell us everything. For example, okay, yet another example. Examples are always evidence for a claim that was recently made. So this example is going to show the limitations, right? You always have to remember that the phrase, for example, points forward to evidence and back to a conclusion. So what's my example? Pollen analyses cannot identify the species, but only the genus or family of some plants. Okay, so we can't be very specific with this analysis. Among these is madder. I don't know any of this stuff. Apparently this is a seed. Sorry, a cultivated dye plant of historical importance in Ireland. Okay, it's a dye plant, whatever that means. Madder belongs to a plant family that also comprises various native weeds, including goosegrass. Again, don't know anything about that, but okay. If madder pollen were present in a deposit, it would be indistinguishable from that of uncultivated native species. Okay, so here's an example of something where we could find pollen, but we wouldn't know exactly which plant it was. We would just know the genus or family. Fair enough. Okay, so it's not as specific or specific as we'd like it to be in some cases. Bottom line for this passage, right? We used to look at the historical documents, and now we have this new methodology of looking at fossilized pollen seeds. And it's pretty helpful. Here are 2 examples of how it was helpful, but there are some drawbacks. It doesn't get as specific as we want in some cases. Would you guys say overall the author likes this new methodology? Okay, I see some people nodding their heads. Yes, I think this is a positive article in favor of this new methodology. It doesn't replace the documentary record. It can it's used in conjunction with it. It's not like totally taking everything over, and it still has some weaknesses, but on balance, it's a good thing. Okay, notice I'm not saying any of this by looking back at the passage and trying to quote sentences. I'm just telling you what I think of this passage after reading it, because the information is in my head, and that's where you want to get. Okay, before we go into the questions, does anyone have any questions about this passage? Because really, 80% of your problems are going to start here. You misunderstand something here, that's going to manifest itself later, and so then you might like think the problem is with a particular question, where really the problem started here.
So I got confused when so he's not talking about it's a different form of analysis. It's not talking about analysis as a whole. That's what I got confused on. I thought he was talking about the analysis versus like as a whole versus the documents.
Oh, you mean when they say like in the 3rd paragraph, analyses of samples?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, I just take that as looking at the pollen itself, right? So when they go into the second paragraph, third paragraph, fourth paragraph, third, fourth, fifth, all the last paragraphs are just focusing on this methodology and analyzing the pollens.
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so we have a question here. I think I struggled with understanding the soil in County Down specifically was what historians thought hadn't been tilled prior. Okay, so yeah, there were some specific facts given in these two examples, right? And we do want to understand the timeline and exactly what happened here to some degree, right? We know that the analyses went back to 400 AD, and they figured out that, hey, they must have cultivated back then, even though they didn't have this plow until later. So that was a surprise. Yeah. Is there a specific question there? Okay. Here's another question. I have trouble reading the passage and remembering it all. Is it possible that some people do need to take notes and identify structures? Perhaps big picture thinkers don't need to take notes, but detailed people, yours truly, need to take notes and identify structures in order to distinguish the main point and caveats. There are exceptions to every process, and everyone is different. That said, I think if you try to restate what the author has said in your own words at certain points throughout the passage, you're gonna force yourself to remember what was said in that moment, and then that's gonna make it much easier 2 minutes later when you're doing the questions. I would practice that first before immediately or reflexively going to notes or something like that. Reggie.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
So I think I was the one that asked the question earlier, or just made a comment, but I struggled with the third paragraph because I think understanding the breakdown of how specific, the specificity of what they're talking about tripped me up for question 26, because you then have to say what the author, I guess, what the analysis disproved what historians thought previously.
Yeah.
And B says cereal grain was not cultivated anywhere in Ireland. And that's almost like one word that changes the meaning of that paragraph, where it's specifically County Down, they didn't cultivate the pollen until blah, 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 blah. So I think I was confused about that, and that tripped me up because I had to spend a lot of time thinking about which one was right.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know the question, but we can go over it when we get there. I think are you saying that you got confused with some of the facts of what was happening in the passage, or you just didn't notice them all? Or
I guess what is when you're reading, how do you make sure that you're pointing out those specific phrases, or capturing the detail that they're saying? Because I can understand the passage as that paragraph I understand generally, but there are words that are, I guess, making it more specific, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it, but
yeah. Well, we can talk about it more when we get to that question. But one thing I do want to say here, and that is that as you're reading the passage, if you feel like anything is cloudy, then you just stop and you say, wait a sec. Okay. So, because there's a lot of new information being thrown at us here, right? Cereal grain pollen. Okay. Apparently that sort of thing exists. County Down is a place apparently that exists in Ireland. I know none of this, right? So sometimes what I'm doing as I'm reading this is I'm saying, okay, so simple idea here is that they looked at samples from Long Loch in County Down. So we have Ireland as a whole, and they went to one part of Ireland and they looked at samples from that. And then what did they find? They found cereal grain pollen. Okay. I don't know what that is, but sounds like it's related to wheat or something like that. And then they saw that starting about 400 AD. Notice I'm taking one sentence and I'm breaking it up into 3 like short sentences that really clarify for me what is happening visually. And so you might need to do that more, because the more you can really visualize what you're reading, the easier it's going to be when you get later in the passage and the questions, and they say things like, I don't know what exactly they said there, something about anywhere or whatever. We'll have to see what happens when we read it. But because you have that visualization of what is literally happening and what these people are discovering, it's going to be clear. I feel like you're saying you understand, but maybe it's not as focused of a picture as it could be. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and jump into into these questions. It looks like they're pretty evenly distributed. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the first question, and we'll go from there. It will probably be a main point question. Yes. Question 23, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main point of the passage? We've already done this. If we've read the passage correctly, we've identified the main point is, hey, there's this new methodology. It's helpful, but it has some downsides, right? That's my prediction. Okay, let's take a look. A, analysis of fossilized pollen is a useful means of supplementing and in some cases correcting other sources of information regarding changes in the Irish landscape. There's nothing objectionable about that answer. That seems very close to what I just said. It does not talk about the downsides, which I think was mentioned in the passage. So maybe this is incomplete, but I'm definitely going to keep that open. Let's go to the other answers just to make sure. B, analyses of historical documents together with pollen evidence have led to the revision of some previously accepted hypotheses regarding changes in the Irish landscape. We did see that as an observation. We did see that some historians are like, wait, we thought this, but actually the new evidence suggests something else. But this isn't the point of the passage. The point wasn't, hey, some hypotheses have changed. It's just that, hey, this new system is helpful, even though it has some drawbacks. So this is not the main point. It's not the focus. C, analysis of fossilized pollen has proven to be a valuable tool in the identification of ancient plant species. That's pretty broad. Like, where's Ireland in this? And what about the landscape and how it's changed over time? Also, this is about plant species, and one of the drawbacks was some plant species can't be identified. It can only do genuses or families. So that's wrong. D, analysis of fossilized pollen has provided new evidence that the cultivation of such crops as cereal grains, flax, and madder had a significant impact on the landscape of Ireland. Again, this is an odd answer because it's like, was the main point that this new approach has now shown the significant impact these things have had? No, it's more like this new evidence has helped us understand exactly what happened. We already knew maybe on some level that they had a significant impact. Again, this misses the mark because of that focus on significant impact as opposed to just understanding what happened. E, while pollen evidence can sometimes supplement other sources of historical information, its applicability is severely limited since it cannot be used to identify plant species. Okay, I think this answer choice is way too strong. Its applicability is severely limited, goes too far. We know that some plant species cannot be identified, but the focus of this passage was how this is helpful, not how this is bad or severely limited. It's just too strong. So also, now that I'm reading E again, it says, since it cannot be used to identify plant species. It cannot be used to identify some plant species, not all plant species, right? So this is also just incorrect. That leaves us with answer choice A. That is the correct answer. Questions on this question before we move on? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So when you say it's too strong, an answer is too strong, what exactly do you mean by that? Because I feel like when I hear too strong, I feel like that means if it's too good to be true, I feel like we'd have to object to that more. I feel like you'd have to go in a deep dive on that.
Okay. Well, this answer is easy to get rid of with my second point, and that is, since it says it cannot be used to identify plant species, it can be used to identify some plant species. So that's inaccurate. But the severely limited goes too far because it said that there are some limits, right? But the passage didn't suggest that it's severely limited. This is that phrase or that word in particular, severely, is what I'm saying is too strong.
Extreme, essentially.
Yeah, it's limited, but is it severely limited? That's going too far. Maybe too far is a better phrase. Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Let's go to question 24. The passage indicates that pollen analyses have provided evidence against which one of the following views? Okay, so I'm looking for a view that was held and then countered by the pollen analyses, right? And there were two. There was the one about cereal grains, and then there was one about flax cultivation. Right? So either one of those could be correct answers. We had some previous view, and then the pollen analyses came in and said, no, you're probably wrong. Sound good? That's my prediction before I go into the answers. So A, the moldboard plow was introduced into Ireland in the 7th century. Okay, the analyses did not change that fact. That fact stayed the same. B, in certain parts of County Down, cereal grains were not cultivated to any significant extent before the 7th century. Okay, so that is a view that was held by the historians because they thought they couldn't cultivate cereal grains before the 7th century, right? They're like, hey, the soil was too hard or clay or something like that, right? So they thought, oh, we have to wait for the moldboard plow to come along. So this is a view that was held, but then they said, no, they were cultivated and they must have learned how to till some other way before that new plow came along. Okay, so this actually sounds like this could be the answer because this was a view that the pollen evidence went against. C, in certain parts of Ireland, cereal grains have been cultivated continuously since the introduction of the moldboard plow. Okay, the pollen analysis didn't talk about what happened after the new plow came in, so don't care about that. D, cereal grain cultivation requires successful tilling of the soil. No one's disputing that. In fact, the passage accepts that as true. Hey, they needed to be able to till. They just had to figure out some other way to do it before the new plow came along. E, cereal grain cultivation began in County Down around 400 AD. This is the idea that was shown to be true by the analyses, not discredited, right? So we're looking for a view that was then thrown out. So this was the view that was introduced because of the evidence. Does that make sense? I think this answer can probably be tricky for some people because they're looking for the wrong thing. Questions on this one? The answer is B. Okay, so the question about answer choice A, just to clarify here, the moldboard plow was introduced in Ireland in the 7th century. The passage is not disputing that at all. In fact, it says at the end of the 3rd paragraph, the pollen evidence indicates that these soils must indeed have been successfully tilled before the introduction of the new plow. So it's suggesting that the plow was still introduced later. They just figured out a way to till before it came. It's not saying that it came earlier, right? So this was not a view that was challenged by the evidence. Yeah, in certain parts, part of answer choice B is actually good because it's referring, this view was held by historians for County Down, right? Well, in certain parts of County Down, the Long Loch part of it. And so because that view was held, yeah, for that part, that fits. It's not, even though this could be referring to other parts, this view was also held for Long Loch, which is one of those certain parts. I hope that makes sense. Okay, question here. How do you remember the specifics without going back into the passage? Well, it's not that I never go back to the passage, but a lot of the specifics are going to come from visualizing what is actually happening. I want to understand, okay, what did they discover? What did they discover about 400 AD? What happened in the 7th century? What happened before the plow? What happened after the plow? I'm trying to get a lay of the land, both figuratively and literally, as I read this passage, right? That's, and it becomes a visual thing. And because it's visual, it's much easier to remember. All right. Isaiah, question.
For a question like this, that like it's 100% in the passage,
Yeah.
would you ever like suggest that like if we don't get it right away, because like for example, I was choosing between A and B, would you just suggest that we read that specific paragraph that would give us the answer?
Yeah, you should go back and figure it out. And then in the long run, you should try to figure out why you didn't catch that the first time, right? Cool. Let's go to the next one, 25. The phrase documentary record primarily refers to what? I can predict this answer before I even look at the answers. That was the historical documents that they were looking at, which were fragmentary and didn't provide a totally complete picture of the situation. Okay. A, documented results of analyses of fossilized pollen. No. It's not. The documentary record is not what the scientists have figured out or written down today. It's what they've read from past documents, right? I think it's said at the very beginning. Yeah, it's even in the first sentence. It says historical documents. B, the kinds and quantities of fossilized pollen grains preserved in peats and lake muds. No, it's not the actual pollen. It's documents written by people in the past. C, written and pictorial descriptions by current historians. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of that answer. It's not current historians. It's past people. D, government and commercial records, maps, and similar documents produced in the past that recorded conditions and events of that time. I don't remember them mentioning maps, but everything
Yeah, I
else
feel
here
like honestly, a lot of people have squeaky shoes in the office though.
I think someone, wait, was that a question or you just unmuted? Okay. Anyways, I don't remember maps, but everything else about this answer sounds good. Let's just check. E, articles, books, and other documents by current historians listing and analysis. No, current historians, that's just wrong. So the answer has to be D. Maybe the passage did mention maps, but I don't remember that. It would seem like something that's related to military or commercial interests, though, so I don't have a problem with that. I'm going to pick D. Questions on this one? Okay. Let's keep going. 26. The passage indicates that prior to the use of pollen analysis in the study of the history of the Irish landscape, at least some historians believed which one of the following. Wow, this is kind of weird. This is very similar to the question we did a couple questions ago, where it's just saying, hey, what's a view that the historians used to have, which then probably changed. So the two views were, one, that they didn't cultivate cereal before the 7th century, and two, they did cultivate flax before the 18th century. You guys remember these beliefs? They were corrected by the pollen record. Or the pollen, I should say. Okay, let's take a look at these. A, the Irish landscape had experienced significant flooding during the 17th. Flooding? Okay, I don't know about that. B, cereal grain was not cultivated anywhere in Ireland until at least the 7th century. Okay, this answer, wait, I think, Reggie, is this the question you were talking about? Because cereal grain was not cultivated before the 7th century in Long Loch, the Long Loch part of County Down. So the word anywhere there, that should throw up red flags when you see that word. It's not that it means it's necessarily wrong. You just have to make sure that the passage supports the idea that this did not happen anywhere in Ireland. And since this only talks about Long Loch in County Down of all places, I don't know about the rest of Ireland. Okay, so tempting but probably wrong. C, the history of the Irish landscape during the 16th and 17th centuries was well documented. No, it wasn't. I think the passage literally mentioned those centuries. Where in those centuries, the documents mainly focused on military or commercial interests. Anyways, D, madder was not used as a dye plant in Ireland until after the 18th century. That's not a belief that was mentioned. Madder was talked about at the very end in relation to the weakness of this new approach. So that's wrong. E, the beginning of flax cultivation in County Down may well have occurred before the 18th century. Yes, that's what they believed. And then the pollen analysis later showed that might not be the case. So that's the answer. And notice this one talks about in County Down as opposed to answer choice B, which says anywhere. If B said cereal grain was not cultivated in Loch County, or sorry, no, what is it? Long Loch, then that answer would be correct as well, maybe. I don't see a problem with it, at least right now. So answer is E. Questions on this one? Can I rephrase the question? So the question is asking, before we did pollen analysis, what is something that some historians believed? That's all it's asking. Before we did pollen analysis, what's something that historians believed? And we have two beliefs mentioned in the passage, one in each example. Okay, last question, question 27. This looks like the least popular question. Which one of the following most accurately describes the relationship between the second paragraph and the final paragraph? Okay, I am going to go back here because I don't remember specifically what the second paragraph was about. The second paragraph starts, studies of fossilized pollen grains preserved in peats and lake muds provide an additional means of investigating vegetative landscape change. Okay, so the second paragraph is where we introduce the pollen analysis, right? I don't need to read the whole paragraph. The final paragraph starts out, it must be stressed, though, that there are limits to the ability of the pollen record to reflect the vegetative history. Okay, this last paragraph was where we said, hey, you can't always tell which species you're talking about when it comes to pollen analysis. So what's the relationship between the second paragraph and the last paragraph? Well, the second paragraph introduces, notice what I'm doing here. I'm coming up with an answer. I do this for every question, right? I'm coming up with the answer before I read the 5 answer choices, and then I go find the one that most closely matches what I'm predicting. Because when you understand the passage, you can do this, right? And we just looked at the second paragraph and the final paragraph, and I'm saying to myself, well, the second paragraph tells me or introduces pollen analysis. The final paragraph tells me a limitation of pollen analysis. So in that sense, it's elaborating. It's elaborating on some of the downsides to this new approach. Sound good? So let's take a look at these answers and see which one is closest. Okay, A, the second paragraph proposes a hypothesis for which the final paragraph offers a supporting example. If anything, the final paragraph tells us a problem, not a supporting example. So A is out. B, the final paragraph describes a problem. Yeah, I think it does. That must be solved before the method advocated in the second paragraph can be considered viable. Okay, Parker, I think you asked about too strong before. This answer choice seems too strong to me. The last phrase, this problem has to be solved before the method can be considered viable. Viable means like usable. Yet the passage has already used it twice in 2 examples to get us new information. So it's clearly viable. It just has some minor drawbacks, right? So B is going too far by suggesting that we have to solve this problem or it can't be used. C, the final paragraph qualifies the claim made in the second paragraph. That's a pretty like empty answer, but qualifies just means to clarify or to limit. Like if you qualify something, if you say, hey, I promise to weed your garden. You're like a super friendly person. You're like, I promise to weed your garden. And then you're like, but only on the weekends. Okay, what you just did is you qualified, you limited your promise, right? And qualifies comes up on the LSAT quite a bit. Would we say the final paragraph qualifies the claim made in the second paragraph? Yeah, it probably does, because the second paragraph says, hey, we got this cool thing. And the final paragraph is like, yeah, but you can't use it for species in some cases. That's qualifying. That's limiting its scope. So this sounds like a pretty good answer. There's nothing in here that's objectionable. D, the second paragraph describes a view against which the author intends to argue. I'm not going to read the rest of this because the author is giving us the final paragraph. This is the author's point, not something the author is going to argue against. E, the final paragraph offers procedures to supplement the method described in the second paragraph. What? No, it's just a limitation. It's like, here's how the method isn't perfect. The best answer here is C. Questions on this one? Okay, so question. In this instance, when you don't understand a word such as qualifies, but know all the other answers are incorrect, would you just pick C? Yes. There are 2 ways to get the right answer on the LSAT. One, you cross out the 4 wrong answers and pick what's left, or you pick the right answer, right? Or ideally, for a lot of these questions, you're doing both. You're like, yeah, I can see why that's correct, and I can see why the other ones are wrong. But sometimes people, they don't understand an answer choice. They're down to 2, and then they do understand one of the 2 answer choices. If you know that one of those 2 is wrong, then cross it out and pick the other one. You got this. And then, of course, after the test is over, figure it out. All right. Thank you. Any other questions on this one? How do you quickly get the broad strokes of the paragraph for questions like this and general organization RC questions? Oh, good questions. So I do what I just did here for you all. When I read this question and it was like, hey, second paragraph and final paragraph, I start reading that paragraph. And usually that's enough to remind me of what I already know because I read the passage well, right? It's like I started reading it and I was like, oh yeah, that's where they talked about this. Same, I mean, I hope that was true for you all as I did that, right? As soon as I start reading that sentence, you're like, okay, that was the paragraph about the limitations or whatever. If that's good enough for you, then you can just stop as soon as you're halfway through that first sentence or whatever. If that's not enough for you, you might need to scan a little bit into the paragraph, but that should be good. Okay, on a similar note, when you aren't familiar with a word in a passage and the context does not hint at the meaning, what should you do? I would try to predict 2 or 3 possible interpretations of that word. Okay, so if you see a word you don't know and you can't figure it out from context, try to say, hey, it could mean this or it could mean that. And then as you continue reading the passage, oftentimes one of your predictions will become much more likely or possible or obvious. Cool. We have 7 minutes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do open Q&A for 7 minutes. And then yeah, we just don't have time for logical reasoning, do we? Okay, well, yeah, we could do one logical reason question. Chris, do you know which one of those 3 is the hardest one? I'm guessing probably the last one.
It was the last one. Yeah.
All right. Let's just go ahead and do that. And then I'll go over the question and then I'll do open Q&A after the time period. I'm sorry, but I'll hang out after class. If you guys need to take off, I totally understand. But go ahead and do that last question. What's it called? It is called positive attitudes. Oh, what a great way to end. Positive attitudes. Do that question. I'll go over it. And then, yeah. And then we'll be done. Thank you, everyone. Good luck. 3 minutes. Okay. I hope that was enough time. How many people are finished? I can't really tell because we don't have a poll, but raise your hand if you're done. Okay, sweet. Great. Thank you. I will go ahead and read this. You will notice that logical reasoning is very similar to reading comp. We have to read and understand sentences. We are going to go a step further, though. In reading comp, I'm much less critical of the arguments or their reasoning. I'm more just trying to understand the reasoning. I am still critical on some level, but in logical reasoning, we're going to knock up that criticism quite a bit, right? The authors of arguments in logical reasoning have the burden to prove their conclusion. They can't just support them. They have to prove them. All right, let's take a look. Okay, advertisers have learned that people are more easily encouraged to develop positive attitudes about things toward which they originally have neutral or even negative attitudes. Okay, that's a lot already. We're talking about advertisers. They've learned that people will feel better about things in which they either don't have any feelings about or have negative feelings about if those things are linked with pictorial help rather than exclusively through prose, and prose is writing, to things about which they already have positive attitudes. Okay, so if you like something and you have, and that thing is linked to something else that you are either neutral or negative about, and it's linked pictorially, so through pictures, not through writing, then you're going to more easily develop positive attitudes about that negative thing than you would if it were through writing, I guess. Therefore, advertisers are likely to do what? Oh, well, when you get this blank line, you can just predict it. But I'm just literally going to take what they told me. They just told me that pictures are better than writing, and linking to things you already like. So I imagine that the advertisers are going to take what you have a negative attitude about, what they're selling, and something you have a positive attitude about, and they're going to put them together in a picture. Is this, I don't know why this just came to my mind, but is this why sex sells? So people are taking positively associated things and trying to mix them with food or whatever. Okay, weird. Which one of the following most logically completes the argument? All right, so therefore advertisers are going to link through pictures positive things and what they're selling. A, use little if any written prose in their advertisements. Maybe. I mean, I think they're more likely to use pictures than writing, but they could still use. I don't love that this is like focusing on what they're not going to do. I really want to see them linking pictures and positive things. And I don't care as much about the writing. But anyways, maybe if that's the only answer that works. B, try to encourage people to develop positive attitudes about products that can be better represented pictorially than in prose. I think they're trying to sell their product. And so whether it can be better represented pictorially than in prose doesn't matter. They're going to represent it, or they're going to try to represent it in pictures. So it's not about choosing products that can be better represented pictorially. It's about taking the product that they have and representing it pictorially. Does that make sense? This is a weird, like, it's like trying to conflate two different ideas in a way the passage did not. C, place their advertisements on television rather than in magazines. Those can both be visual, so wrong. D, highlight the desirable features of the advertised product. Yeah, by contrasting them pictorially with undesirable features of a competing product. No, that's like the opposite, right? That's like, we're going to take, you have a positive association with our product, you have a negative association with some other product, and we're going to put them together, which is then actually going to make people like the competing product more than they did before. That's not good, right? Okay, so A is the only one that might work so far. E, create advertisements containing pictures of things most members of the target audience like. Yes. That, such as, well, back to my example, sex sells, you know, good looking models, whatever they want to do, they're going to put that in their ads because people like that. And then they're going to associate that with the product being sold and so on. So E, I think, is better than A because it focuses on what they're going to do as opposed to what they're not going to do. And I really think that's the focus. So E, questions? Silence, is that a good thing? Maybe that's a good thing.
So I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry to disrupt the silence. I'm still trying to understand how you come up with that conclusion, because I picked D because I mean I get now why D is wrong because it's talking about competing products. But what if it was to talk about undesirable features in their own products? And no, obviously that's not what the question says, but or the answer.
Well,
but.
that's overly specific, right? That's like, we know that they want to associate things that their product, which presumably we have a neutral or maybe even a negative attitude about, they want to associate that with something positive. But if you pick an answer that says, okay, well, they're going to highlight the desirable features of a product with the undesirable features of the product, it's like,
Right.
maybe, like, but are they gonna, is that the way they're gonna do this, or could they do it some other way? Like, we don't have evidence for which way they're specifically going to do this, and E leaves that open.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
I want
Great.
to quickly
Yeah.
flag a question, which I think is interesting. With answer choice E, how do we know, or rather, how do the advertisers know what most members of the target audience like?
Well, I don't know how they know that, but it doesn't really, well, on some level, it would be nice if this answer choice actually said, create advertisements containing pictures of things that advertisers believe most members of the target audience like, right? Like, that would make the most sense because they're going to do what they think is going to be liked. But I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that they're going to figure that out. And even if they don't, it's still the best answer of all these, right? It's the only one that's as close to the evidence. It's the closest to the evidence, I guess. Does that answer your question, Eric? Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great.
Cool. Okay.
Can I ask also one question, please?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the qualifies, so I just read that somebody commented. So that qualify in the previous reading comprehension. So what it is used for generally in LSAT? Because I didn't understand that. That was one of the answer choices. How it is second paragraph related to the last one.
Yeah. So you want to know what qualifies means in that context?
Yeah, for example, like in LSAT, they use takes for granted as assume, or no, what was it? Yes, so yeah. So disqualify, because when I read the answer choice, it doesn't really make sense in everyday life. Like qualify, it's a different meaning in everyday life, at least to an extent that I know. But here, I guess in the,
Yeah, a couple of things here. So qualifies on the LSAT means limits, but that's also what it means in everyday life. So I think you're just
limits. Oh, I didn't know that meaning. Yeah, I'm not a native, so yeah.
That's okay.
I will note it down. Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Okay.
Pretty much the LSAT uses words as they're defined. So if you ever struggle with a word, just look it up, and it may just be clarifying your understanding of the definition. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got to E, but I was really struggling because A is not wrong. It makes logical sense that if pictorial advertisements work better than prose and they can use less prose. What definitively makes E better than A? I guess the question is.
Yeah, so the passage is talking about linking these two things together with pictures is going to more easily encourage people to develop positive attitudes, right? So I know that they're going to do that. Are you cool with that?
Yes.
Does that mean that they are not going to use writing? Two.
No. Where I struggled was it doesn't say that writing is going to have an adverse effect. This is the overthinking part, right? It doesn't say it's going to have an adverse effect. So it's not like if they... Go ahead, Ben. I'm just going to let you go. I understand where you're going. Go ahead.
So
can I add to that a little bit? Because I'm so glad she said it.
Sure.
And whoever that was, I totally see where you were going with that. One of the comments that I included in the chat specific to answer A was language taken directly from the text. From the passage, rather than exclusively through prose. However, what I started with E and then I second guessed myself and went back to A because of those words. However, what Ben said that was most helpful to me was, it asked about what the advertisers were like most likely to do versus what they were likely not to do. So like the answer was in the affirmative versus in the negative. That was the way I processed what you said. I was like, okay, that makes sense. In option A talks about what they're not going to do. Versus
yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would like hang my hat on that. I think the word exclusively, which I kind of glossed over, is really helpful here. So if pictorial help is better than exclusively using prose, then we know they're going to use pictures, but it doesn't, and they're not going to use just writing. But how much writing are they going to use in addition to pictures and so forth? We don't know. We just don't know.
Settles it. They exclusively settles it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. That's funny because if we didn't find E, then yeah, that would be something where you might need to go back and just dig further. I missed that. Good questions. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, it's sort of going back to reading comp for a second. I just had a quick question about timing. I noticed you gave us 12 minutes to complete the section, and that stood out to me because that's about what I'm averaging for a reading comp section to get the most of the questions correct. So I'm wondering if that's an adequate amount of time, do you think, or should I focus more on, trying to complete it quicker?
No, just don't worry about time at all. What you want to focus on 100% is acing the passages that you get to. And I would say that don't even worry about that. Ace the questions that you get to. If you can do that, like if someone comes to me and they say, hey, man, I'm really struggling in reading comp. I can only do 9 questions, which is like a passage and a half, right? And I was like, oh, how many of those do you get correct? Oh, I always get all of them correct. I'd be like, okay, great. You're on the path to getting 10 correct and 11 and 12 and so on. But if someone comes to me and they're like, yeah, well, I can do 25 questions, no problem in 35 minutes, but I get only 15 of them correct. I have no idea, like, okay, like if we slow down, are you going to start getting them right? Or do you really just not understand this stuff? It's not the sure stepping stone to success, right? It's like you could even be hurting yourself by developing bad habits of getting used to picking wrong answers and being okay with that. Amelia.
So this is more of a general question, but like when we're going through our answer choices, if we get to like B, let's say, and you are like you think it's the right answer, you're like sure it's the right answer, do you recommend reading the rest of them or just choosing it? Because I struggle with time a lot.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Read the rest and just keep focusing on the percentage you get correct of the ones you do. Because we're playing the long game here. And the long game is, okay, can I get to a place where I'm getting 95%, 100% correct of the ones I do? If you can get to that point, then the rest of the points are going to come. They may just going to take more practice, but they're going to come with time. And as for reading the last few, like you said B, right? So you're like, oh, B sounds really good. Well, read C, D, and E. You'll probably read them quickly because you're just looking for one reason to get rid of them. But if you can't get rid of D, you're like, oh, well, I don't see anything wrong with D. It's going to force you to go back and double check B. And it's not uncommon to realize that you missed something and that D is actually better. Nafasat. How's it going?
Hi, Ben. Yeah, I'm great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask a specific question about a specific question? Like I
sure,
have
about the
yeah.
logical reasoning question?
Yeah, logical reasoning.
Yep.
Yeah, I've encountered the question stem, which is a technique used in the argument, in the philosopher's argument, and how to classify this question stem. Because right answer was that argument provided a definition of a term, but the definition of a term was not the reason why the philosopher come to that conclusion. Like it was.
Is this a different question or what? Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah,
recognize.
this is a different question, like more not related to today's class.
Oh, okay. Nafasat, let's save it for the end. Is that cool?
Okay.
Just so you can get through some more questions, and then I'm happy to try to figure out what you're asking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Chase.
Hi. I don't know if we're in like general questions or not. Are we?
Go for it. Yeah, we are.
Okay, yeah. So I'm dyslexic, and my big concern right now is reading speed. And so I read about 150 words per minute or so, which is like far below like average, I think. And I was wondering, is that something I should be worried about or trying to solve or like trying to increase, like to get more to an average reading speed? Or would you just say like keep going at like what you guys are suggesting and trying to develop?
Well, I would keep focusing on accuracy. You don't want to shift your focus to speed. That said, have you applied for accommodations?
I have not. Well, I'm planning on taking the test next summer, so I'm not like at that step yet. But I should be able to get 50% time. I'm pretty sure because I got on the SAT. I got 50% time there. So
okay,
I think that I should be able to get it for the LSAT.
Well, so are you practicing with 50% time extra?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. And well, so how much of a section are you finishing accurately right now?
I haven't taken too many tests yet, but I don't know right now. Like maybe what I've been doing is I've just actually been completely ignoring time altogether and like spending like multiple hours on an entire like four reading comprehension things.
Oh,
and,
for
like,
passages
going at it
within a section?
4 passages, yeah, at a time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, what I would do is I would do a time section and I would set it to time and a half because that's likely what you're going to get. And then I would also maybe, well, you can sign up for a test way in the future and then apply. I think you have to sign up before you can apply for accommodations, but make sure you get that, or maybe you decide that you want, actually, whatever you're going to ask for, you're going to get pretty much. So anyways, my point here is do a time section, time and a half. Realize that most people aren't finishing. So if you're not finishing, that's not necessarily because of your dyslexia. That's probably partly explained by that, but also partly explained by the fact that people just need to get better at the test first. And it's not uncommon to be able to only do half the section. But if you can do like hardly 25% of the section, that's it. Maybe you need to do double time, right? And so then this would dictate what sort of accommodation you asked for. Double time is a double-edged sword because it is a long ass test. And so it's a benefit, but also can be draining. So
yeah, that's a long time. But I think I didn't even realize that that's a thing that was possible. I thought it was just up to 50. So if I feel like if I were to be able to get double time, that would be something I would really like to have.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah. So anyways, try it out and get used to ignoring the time. So get comfortable with not finishing a section. This is good advice for you and for anyone really, even without dyslexia. And then you just are cool with like, okay, I could only do 12 questions, but I did very well on them. So now I'm going to finish the ones that I didn't get to after the time is up. That's fine. You can do that in blind review, and then just learn from your mistakes and then do it again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one more on that. And then, so do you know if it would be possible to like get like certain extra times in certain sections? Because I know that I'm great at the logic games and I don't think I would need like the whole time there. But like on the reading comprehension, like I very definitely did.
I don't actually know. From what I've always heard, you get it for all 4 sections, but
yeah, I guess I'll figure that out. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for coming. Tessia.
Hey, it's Tasia.
Tasia, thank you.
So I struggle a lot with the reading comprehension. I've pretty much got the other ones figured out. But I'm finding that it's a lot of the supported questions that I'm missing. And so I'm curious if there's some way to approach that I haven't tried, that I'm just totally missing that. Should I be asking my question when I'm approaching that question?
I'm sorry. It sounds like you're saying supported questions are the ones that tend to give you trouble.
Yeah.
So one thing about supported questions, especially in reading comprehension, is that the vast majority of questions are some form of supported question. So it's possible that you might be looking beyond the mark for these questions. One way to treat these questions is just treat them as must be true questions. And just ask yourself, does this answer choice have to be true, given what was said in the passage? And if an answer choice restates something that was in the passage and seems extraordinarily boring and obvious, that's actually correct. Sometimes I think people they're looking for like a little bit beyond maybe what the passage said, like, oh, what is supported or inferred from the passage? But really, you're just looking for what has to be true, essentially, maybe with a little wiggle room.
Okay, so just look at it as like a must be true question. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, cool. Other questions?
I'm not sure if this is posted, but are you going to do this again?
Oh, do a free class again? Yes, we will. I don't know when the next one is, but maybe next month, maybe sooner. Let's see here. We have a question. I've been studying with a couple of books from other organizations, and there's a lot of reading and not much going into drilling like you guys talk about at LSAT Demon. Could you please touch on how LSAT Demon approach, how does LSAT Demon approach studying? Okay. So one thing about, we definitely focus a lot more on drilling and doing time sections than on reading about the test or theory. And that is because for the vast, vast, vast majority of people, they learn much faster by doing something, failing at it specifically, and then learning from that specific example. Right? It's almost like I can sit here and teach you grammar rules and you can get all tied up in knots in your head, or I can show you a sentence and then show you how it's grammatically incorrect. Right? Which is an easier like experience, some abstract rule or a specific example. And that's what happens with the LSAT. It's like you got to do a question, get it wrong or get it right, but not understand it, and then learn about what you did wrong in that particular case. And then you extrapolate from there to multiple cases, especially after you do several of them. This is pretty consistent with learning science too, by the way. So we've modeled the demon off of research that people have done into learning, which is why when you do the demon drilling, you don't get the same question type back to back to back. That feels better in the short run, but it's actually worse in the long run. So varied practice is better. Anyways, here's a question. Besides blind review, is there another way to review prep tests? Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that. The blind review is simply the opportunity to try to do the question again before you look at the explanation. You don't have to do that. In fact, when it comes to the review process, I would say that's one component that happens early on and is pretty unimportant. If it doesn't happen, I don't care. What's far, far, far more important is your ability to articulate exactly why the wrong answer that you chose is wrong and why the correct answer is correct. If you find yourself saying, oh, that answer choice sounds better, or it seems better, or it looks like a better fit, you probably haven't identified exactly why it's better. With this last question that we did, people were struggling with answer choice A, but when you identify the word exclusively in the passage, it really kills that answer, right? And you want to be able to identify that and say, aha, this is why this is wrong. That's what unlocks the test for you. And so what does that mean? When you review, you do a question and then you review it until you understand it. Cool. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I went way over. If you have any feedback, please let us know on the syllabus page, good or bad. It's all helpful. Otherwise, yeah, have a good Monday and good luck studying.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Oh, Nafasat, I forgot you had a specific question. I'll go ahead and answer that as well. What can you say the question again?
Can I send the question to the chat, or
yes,
is it okay?
That would be helpful.
Because,
well,
yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, it's free class. I don't want to, to violate any policy here.
That's fine.